It's a great time because AI requires you having two things. One is proprietary knowledge. So it's the first time we're going to be paid for what we know rather than what we do. Historically, we've been paid for what we do.
There's almost that expectation for variety in your working pattern as well. You want to be able to explore different things and work in different ways. And you're right, it is then the application, right?
One of the major benefits of a career in TA, which sets things up nicely, is we know a little bit about everything. Recruiting prepares for you for that, because every time you're hiring, you learn a little bit about that function. You learn a little bit about how that job is done. You learn a little bit about what's important, and the more you then work and spend time, the more you learn that.
Bill, welcome. Absolute pleasure to have you on the show, buddy.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, great to be here, Sam. Good to talk to you.
And you are in full Bill Boorman regalia. I'm loving the setup. I'm loving the outfit. And I think for people, if they have been living under a rock and they operate in TA and they don't know who you are, it would be great just to give an overview of who you are, Bill. Brief introduction.
Yeah, so I'm Bill Boorman. My background is I started out in recruiting 42 years ago, first job at 16. I took it for a few weeks because my mum told me I had to go to work if I wasn't going to go to school. And I went into recruitment, and I'm still here. In and around recruitment, I work with technology companies now doing advisory. I work with investors, so I work with people like HackerJob on advisory in all kinds of different areas, really. And I work on technology, and I do a lot of research and thinking in the background. Plus, I do some street art, some stand-up, and kind of bits of all kinds of things.
That you do. A menagerie of things, Mr. Bournemouth. A menagerie. And why don't we kick things off? Because I know you've just come back from Amsterdam, and I saw there was lots of great press about your talk. So give us cliff notes. I know we've got some other things that we wanted to talk about today, but give us cliff notes on that.
Yeah, I'll give you the cliff notes on it. I've kind of made a decision this year that I'm only going to speak at 6 or 7 events as opposed to the 60 that I usually do. So it's good to get out and get real feedback from people again. But the big point, we were talking about AI, and I don't want to talk too much about AI because I'm sure people are pretty bored of where we are in kind of top of the hype cycle at the minute. But my main point is what I actually think we're looking at is intelligent automation. So we've moved on from having automated tools which have taken on tasks, and we've taken a whole load of the recruiter workflow and automated that, whether that's things like suddenly after 10 years of trying, we've got diary management systems that work properly, and scheduling, communication, enablement, all this kind of good stuff. And we've added, and there's intelligence. So the tools are beginning to think for themselves rather than needing to have a human clicking and prompting on the end. And that's where we're at. And when we look at the workflow of the work that we're doing on things like sourcing, outreach messaging, or actually shortlisting, all this kind of stuff that we do in recruitment, that's about 90% of the work. So right now I'm looking at a workflow, and 90% of that work can be efficiently and well intelligently automated, if we want to call it that, like AI plus automation. So what does it lead? And should we be worried about that? Because the other trend that's going on, which I think is quite important, is teams shrunk significantly by about 40%. TA teams shrunk by about 40% in terms of headcount. And we're not seeing any sign that that's recovering. Partly that's it. And I was trying to figure out, and I've spent a lot of time talking to people to figure out whether that's because there's a lower volume of jobs, which is reasonably flat. I think it's going to be flat for another 12, 14 months. There's a lot of restructure going on where there was over-hiring, and there was mass layoffs. And now a lot of the tasks are being impacted by AI and automation, and we're figuring out actually what does headcount look like. So the interesting thing is a lot of recruiters got cut, a lot of people were out of work. I've noticed in the last 3 months, really, the senior TA people that I knew that were the leadership in tech and other industries are beginning to be rehired. So people are starting to think about strategy and say, what does next year look like? So the hiring is generally going on at the senior strategic end, or there's more specialist hiring. So you're having things like people analytics, workforce planning, internal mobility. So as opposed to, and I don't want to say it disrespectfully, what you might call the jobbing recruiter who goes in, fills roles, and is on that kind of hamster wheel of this is the requirement. That's not really growing. Those recruiters are being expected to do more work and bring in tools to do the heavy lifting for that. So when I look at that and say, what does that look like? And we're going to talk a bit more about where I think the direction of travel in that, which is pretty fast. 90% of the workflow can be automated with intelligence, right? And that includes things like matching, sourcing, outreach, identification of people, messaging. And it's generally going to be robots talking to robots anyway. You know, the candidates are AI, the recruiters are AI. They meet in the middle, and somewhere along the line, a couple of humans get a message saying, "We think it's about time you actually connect, and we can make you an offer." That's where we're getting to in some organisations. So it's easy to say, does that mean then the recruiter role is one of these roles that's becoming to some degree redundant? Do we cut by 90%? Actually, what I'm really looking at is there's 10% of human brilliance and the 10% of human brilliance. And the thing is, the 10% of the human brilliance, the things which the people could do really well in terms of relationships and so on, is actually what we've wanted as recruiters to do for probably 20, 30 years. We wanted to give back that experience. So what all the automation is doing is giving us back time to say, okay, if 100% of our job was concentrated on that 10% of excellence, that would be really cool for everyone. That would actually make everything better for everybody. And I think when I was talking about that, you go from the doom and gloom prediction, really, of saying all these jobs are going to be automated, and I've got people sitting in the audience going, yeah, but that's kind of my job description. You just put my job description up on a screen and gone, yeah, matching, outreach, first line messaging, diary scheduling, notification, all this kind of stuff. They're like, that's really what I do in my day to day. But if you take that 10% of human excellence, I mean, I think AI's people who are working in talent acquisition at the minute, it's a great time because AI requires you having two things. One is proprietary knowledge. So it's the first time we're going to be paid for what we know rather than what we do. Because historically, we've been selected and paid, and that sounds like semantics, but that's fundamentally different. Historically, we've been paid for what we do. Can you fill these roles, do this job, get yourself organised, manage the project, do all that kind of stuff. Now we're being paid now we're looking at it and saying, I want to hire people who will be able to build the prompts, create the codes, do the work, have enough recruiter intelligence to be able to look at an outcome and say that doesn't look right. You know, we hear a lot in AI about, your ghost outcomes. You try to write something or where nonsense comes out the back end for whatever reason. To say that those results don't look right or they look unbalanced from an ED&I point of view. So your knowledge suddenly is going to become a premium. And the other good thing is people entering the industry will no longer acquire that knowledge because they won't be doing that work. So this pool for another at least 10 years of people who learn to write the prompts, check the work, understand what's going on are going to be at a premium. So I think everybody got really excited about that at the end from going, oh, he's basically saying, I'm going to be replaced by a machine and it's going to do a better job than me and it's going to be cheaper and faster and blah, blah, blah. And I know which way my company's going to go. They ended up going, actually, yeah, we talked late, and it was late into the night because I was at an event and we were adding alcohol to the discussion. Late into the night about, well, what is that 10% of excellence? What is that 10% that we think we can do? And I'm saying to people saying, well, honestly, fundamentally, morally, never mind business reasons, do you want to give a good candidate experience? And they say, yeah, of course. And what stops you doing that? I haven't got time. Well, if you get your time back. So very excited. I've got some really, hot calls I've had for a talk. I'm very excited about that. I'm very excited about continuing to explore what's that 10% of human excellence?
And I think it's, some of those other things as well, right? When we think about that 10%, it's that business partnering, it's being able to have those deeper discussions with the organization and understanding, truly what they're wanting from candidates. It's looking at the longer term impact, of those individuals. It's also then spending time, like you say, analyzing the prompt, analyzing the kind of situation that you're in and thinking, well, practically for some of these roles, we may want to think about hiring this in a different way, right? Is it build, buy, borrow, bot? Looking at the kind of more strategic workforce plan element of what you're doing, working on the brand, candidate experience. It's all of these kind of human creative elements which they can contribute to. And I think the other part here, which, we need to, if we zoom out from a kind of societal lens, I think what Biden, put forward, which was, Bernie Sanders put forward a couple of weeks ago, was like, well, do we need to reduce the working hours in a week, right? Is it about making people redundant? No, automation allows you to work faster. So do you need to work for as long, right? And it goes back to Henry Ford and, the 5-day week and those things. So right? It's an interesting one.
Yeah. We've got a conflict in that because we live in a capitalist society, right? So the one thing we've learned from technology is it's always been used about the efficiency has always been used against the employees.
Yeah.
It's never been used, right? If you could, that's a good example. We talk about how if we introduce a machine that means you can work more efficiently and instead of doing 35 hours a week, you can do your job in 15. Generally, the solution then has been, so we're going to pay you for 15.
Yeah. But it's the balance. It's the balance, isn't it, between profit and then the human condition. Yeah. I think this is such a large and seismic shift.
It's a society issue, and I think, and I can tell you why this one is going to be different. Why it's going to be different this time is because it's going to impact the people at the top, not the people at the bottom.
Yeah.
So technology has always taken out the lower level of employee. Go back to the spinning jenny. That's why you had riots about that, when they mechanized weaving. And however far back in history you want, and I know you're a bit of a history buff, however far back you want to go, it's been about machines have come and we've taken the people out. Machines have come and we've taken the people out. And now we're going to, warehouses in Amazon that are thousands of square feet and there's like 4 people in there, an engineer fixing the machine and stuff. We go, right. But actually, if we look at what AI is doing in terms of contextual decision making and driving things, it's actually taking out the knowledge workers.
Yeah.
We've never had that before. We've never had people at the top of the tree being threatened by the technology. It's always been, if you want to call it, the disposable class. You could move to another factory or get them to do something else, or go and learn something else. Go and do something different. So
and the more knowledge that you have, almost as well. Sorry to jump in, but the more knowledge that you have, the more at risk you are, right? The greater depth of knowledge that you need, the bigger amount of information that you need to be able to process, the more likely that you are.
Probably the more expensive you are. The more expensive you are, which means the bigger saving the organisation could make if they take 10 of you out of the equation, right?
Yeah.
So I think there's going to be a difference in terms of suddenly when it's impacting the senior level and the knowledge level, people are going, oh, hang on a minute, we've got to find a different way of doing it. So society has a way of working this out, but I think there's just so much coming at the moment. COVID was an accelerator really for 10, 20 years in lots of things, because lots of people started doing things that they should have done years before but just never did. So remote working and all these kind of things like remote working, hybrid, interview challenges where you might never actually meet the person. Just doing a bit of video becoming, you'll remember, in the old days, we used to talk about IRL, in real life.
Yeah.
I say, oh, I look forward to meeting you in real life, Sam.
Yeah.
But I might have had, now if I've had 20 Zoom calls with you, I feel that I've met you 20 times.
Exactly, yeah.
Whereas historically, in real life meant we had to be sitting in the same room face to face. So I think we've got all of those society changes that we're trying to deal with. And we also have a major challenge in that somebody wrote on Facebook this week and said, I'm going to do a careers talk to some teenagers about the impact of AI and blah, blah, blah. And my comment was, actually, you should probably go and listen to the teenagers. Like they'll understand it. They're bored. they're born with this stuff. So it's like the evolution of remote working is no different to the evolution of gaming, being at home doing stuff. So I think we need to, we're our perfect storm, right? We're our perfect storm of, there's three things going on which are causing significant shifts aside from the technology acceleration, the speed at which we're changing. And I'm old enough to remember when we got the internet and, what we thought that would do. Not so long ago, it's like in a lifetime, right? So when we look at when we get where we're at right now, I think we're at this stage where we've got we've got the technology impact. We've also got zero unemployment, and yet we're in recession. And so you're looking and saying a lot of what I'm talking about with boards at the moment is there's zero unemployment. Post-COVID, a lot of older people haven't gone back to work. You have a larger pool of inactive employees. So that's people who are not working but not engaged in the job market. Because we've got lots of long-term feeling the sick impact, particularly of COVID, of lockdown, of long COVID has been a major issue, and people not returning to work. And you've got a lot more viable options. If you're smart, you do a job and you do your career and you get to 40, whatever, it's much easier for you to become a consultant, have a portfolio career, do bits and bits. So more and more people are coming out of the workforce in the traditional sense, in the way that we knew them. You even see if we look at TA, more and more TA people are going, well, actually, something they've done in the Netherlands for years, saying, I'll go and be an immersive TA leader. So I'll go and work with some companies some of the time, but I'm going to work for 5 companies. I'm not going to work for one. So we've got all of those market dynamics impacting. We've got hybrid work and people working from home and what that means. And there's a battle in organisations which is really less around what's productive and more around what's... I met someone in Amsterdam and they went, look, this is our brand new office. We built it. We've spent 20 million in the office. 5 people turn up.
Yeah.
And we built it just, right? So, and we've also got more young people going into education, and we're the end of the baby boomer period. So people went from having an average family size of 4 to an average family size of 2. And that's the generation that's coming into the workforce now at this moment, like the end of the baby boomers. So there's less people going into the workforce and more people are coming out of the workforce because they're too old to work. Or they don't want to work, or they've had enough, or whatever they're doing. So the pool of available labour in any developed economy is shrinking by the millions, and that's why we have a recession, but we still have more jobs than candidates.
Yeah, and it's certainly a big part. It shouldn't. And I think the other part of maybe why we're not in a recession is 40% of the world is going to election, and you don't tend to have recessionary impact in an election year. You kind of you play with the financials to do it, but I think
it does have a major impact, right? Because for the first time, there are 73 elections in the world's democracy.
Yeah.
There's 27 in Europe.
Yeah. Just
in Europe, before we get into America, and they've got their election in November, but which we all know about and are following closely. So, and what you get in an election year, any election year, doesn't matter where it is you actually get 6 to 9 months of inactivity, because you have 3 or 4 months before the election when it's announced, when people are like not quite sure what's going to happen, not sure what the legal position is going to be. You look at the behaviour of investors who invest in things, and you look at the behaviours of enterprise corporate organisations, and they're kind of like, we're going to wait and see what happens. Is it going to be left? Is it going to be right? Where's it going to go? And we're also, I think, at the moment, reasonably unprecedented times. We're getting more strange results where you might get very right-wing leaders, very left-wing leaders.
It's increasingly polarised, right? That is...
very... Well, it's a polarised society, so naturally you're getting polarised elections on single issues and a major drama. But you're going to have 3 or 4 months of that going on, which is a distraction, and people don't want to make decisions. And then once you've had the election and people go into an office, you usually have 3 or 4 months of waiting to see what they're going to do. And the transitioning team coming into power are feeling their way in, sorting out who's doing what job, what department, what's going on, right? So even in the UK, we know we're going to have, if we look at a calendar year from today, we're going to have 7 to 8 months of pretty much inactivity.
Yeah.
And if you look at the job line is pretty, it's not dropping significantly anymore. It's not growing significantly anymore. It's just kind of.
And so then let's change the pace then. And I think, you know, in the context of what's going on in the macro picture, that's one thing. You kind of you evidence this kind of big piece, that 10% of brilliance, or like the last mile that Amazon would call it, and this like TA evolution. So yeah, like you say, you've been through a few of these motions.
I don't really think TA is going to exist as a function.
Well, so let's get your view. Let's get your your take.
Yeah, so, and this has been happening for a while. You would have seen me talk about it at Wreckfest. I think you might have been working for Wreckfest when I first talked about it. I've been talking about this for 5, 6, 7 years. Of the trend that's kind of happening is within, if you think about the TA function and what are we responsible and accountable for, that range of responsibility has been growing into other HR areas which historically haven't been our domain.
Yeah.
For lots of reasons. And that started, actually, you can track it back on a timeline, that started with onboarding. Organisations recognised that there was a gap between TA getting someone to the hiring position where there was an offer and a shake of hands in the exchange of contract, and somebody starting in the 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, however long that period was. So it made sense to say, okay, we're going to extend the hiring timeline to include the onboarding period. So you'll be responsible. That person will live with you. That relationship will live with you in TA until they've completed onboarding. And we saw the technology coming in to deal with that, to deal with the logistics of, I was doing some work with DocuSign building this stuff, like I think probably 8 years ago, where suddenly you could digitally sign contracts, you could do things that used to take you a month of emailing stuff about and getting it scanned and sent back and blah, blah, blah. We could do it all in like what the, so we changed the physical onboarding. And then we started looking at the relationship of onboarding, which is making sure people are talking to people, they're prepared. Is there some learning you can do in the in-between? Can we invite you to some stuff and some conversations so that you're coming into the organisation much quicker? So TA took on that onboarding responsibility, which is very different to bringing people into the organisation. And then the real big area, which is the big one that we're looking at the moment then, is internal mobility, is the movement of people. And what happens when internal mobility goes into TA is actually we recruit in exactly the same way internally as we do externally, which is we're looking for people who will be successful at the interview, get the job.
Yeah.
And, you know, you create internal career sites and and you might actually get a bit of permission to go and do a bit of internal sourcing where you're messaging people without needing permission and so on. And then that runs for a little while and you get some success with that and you start filling more of your roles internally because you have a focus on that and you're looking at that. That talent pool is coming up first because they're the easiest people to talk to, and you have a greater success rate when you move people internally than when you take the risk of going outside trying to find the best talent. So it moves to there, and that then naturally evolves into career pathing where you're starting to look at people are starting to go, I want to do something in the next 12 months. I'd like to move into this. Let's have a look at, since I've known you, Sam, at HackerJob, you've had what, 3 jobs or 3 job titles and responsibilities that have kind of evolved, but they followed the same thing. So you're a very good example of people in that where it changes. You go from knocking on doors to try and sell a service to actually now you work a bit more on customer relationship because you've got the customers, and then, well, maybe you can go out and tell the brand story and do that stuff, right? So we're seeing those kind of portfolio careers where for you to get new experience or new motivation in your role, actually, historically, you would have had to leave in order to do that.
Yeah, or highly likely to. Or you would have been doing the same role with a new title, basically, like those internal moves.
With a new title,
right?
Yeah. Yeah, so roughly, so this is what we're seeing across organisations, and that's becoming coming into TA. That's in the kind of HR world. Now, the other thing which I think is really important is it's up to 3 years ago, I knew maybe 5 people in my was reasonably sized network. I knew 5 people who had become CHROs from heads of TA.
Yeah. Yeah.
So usually you might get a senior TA role, but that's your
Yeah.
senior.
Yeah.
And the reality is the CHRO role is the power seat. That's who's on the board. And then in the CHRO role, that will incorporate talking about TA and talking about learning and talking about payroll and all the other good things that go on, right? And the CHRO has historically been a generalist. And what's happened in the last 3 years is I actually know 55 people in my network who have changed their job title to head of people or something, some similar.
Yeah.
I'm sure your network is exactly the same. You become head of people, and it's easy to think, is that semantics? Does that just mean you get a new business card? Actually, no. What it means is you're doing talent attraction, you're doing career development, you're doing internal mobility, you're doing workforce planning, you're doing people analytics, which is a lot more strategic in terms of where do we need to go and what's our plan going to be. So the head of people is a much broader role, which has become a career opportunity out of
Exactly.
TA career path, which this really 2 or 3 years ago. And it also means that now there's a TA orientated voice on the board, the legendary seat at the table.
And that's precisely the difference, right? Because I think it's that distinction. It's the distinction when we think about semantics. It's the same as when we were looking at the Resourcing Leaders 100. Would it be the Recruitment Leaders 100? Like that distinction in phrasing is so different, right? Even recruitment resourcing, are you resourcing the skills, the setup to solve a problem, a business objective, or are you the transactional function that delivers recruitment? And it's the same with that kind of people versus talent acquisition. It's two very, very different things, deliberately so.
Yeah, and now if you combine that direction of travel with automation to do the heavy lifting, which TA has historically done, which was, not, you look at most TA organisations, 80% of the spend is, and time and effort is on attraction. 80% of budget and everything else is spent on, can we just get enough people in the top of the funnel so we can end up with some? Now you change that perspective, you turn that funnel upside down. You're saying, right, we'll look internally, we'll look at alumni, we're beginning to be able to properly contextually source our data by using some of the AI tools to say, right, with one search inquiry, we can go and we can ask a long prompt question. And this is why I'm super excited about AI for recruiters, because I think if we can't do anything else, we can ask great questions.
Yeah.
And we know what the next question is, right? That's what you do with the hiring manager. That's what you do with the recruiters. So perfect opportunity. Now, the other thing that's happened is learning and development has actually become the employer brand. That's why people join organisations. What am I going to learn? How am I going to look more employable to somebody else in 3 years' time if I take this role? That's how people are taking gigs. They're not taking careers. Like if I go into particularly in tech, in the world where you live, if I go, so the L&D content becomes the employer brand. In reality, that's what people want to know. That's what people want to connect with. That's what people stay engaged with. So what we're seeing is the L&D and TA function coming together as one. And then rather than growing that TA team, you're getting specialists coming in with particular skills that might be people analytics, that might be recruitment marketing. And that's where I think we're at in terms of the future, is that we won't have a TA function siloed. We won't have a learning and development function siloed. We'll have a people function.
And I've got an interesting challenge to that. I was speaking to Toby Colshaw on a very similar topic of like, what's the structure of a TA function going to be in the future, and how does that look? And obviously he's in a role which, one of them you just described. I think his challenge back to me was, well, are we just overstretching ourselves as TA professionals? Like, are we really the expert in the room when it comes to marketing? Are we really the expert in the room when it comes to analytics? Like, would it be better to bring somebody who's a domain expert and teach them the semantics of recruitment, or is it better to have the semantics of recruitment and become a domain expert? Which I thought was a really interesting play and kind of challenge on it.
That's asked by a numbers guy. You don't disrespect to Toby, right? But I think the reality is, what do we need? One of the major benefits of a career in TA, which sets things up nicely, is we know a little bit about everything, right? You know, I'm paid as a consultant to do employer brands. If I look at what I'm doing now, I'm advising investors where to spend money, how do you get to EBITDA and all that kind of thing. Recruiting prepares for you for that, because every time you're hiring, you learn a little bit about that function. You learn a little bit about how that job is done. You learn a little bit about what's important, and the more you then work and spend time, the more you learn that. You know, I can remember when, if you looked at the people in recruiting, if I go back 15 years, 20 years, whatever, there was a group of people, the Malders and people like that, people who we know, who were the agency people. And the agency people, and then there was generally agency recruiters as opposed to in-house. At that point, that function, the in-house recruiting function, was really an HR function that dealt with agencies to do that work. That was the history of it. But those people never mixed. True is a really good example of that, right? We were the first time to run an event where we went, let's get all the people in the room and let's get them all talking.
Yeah.
And so I don't think the answer is, a specialist marketeer is better at coming into recruiting, or a recruiter is better at coming into marketeers. I think that's a people question of who is the best person to do that. I think the difference is what you're looking at in people is their capacity to go and acquire new knowledge and apply it in a working way. So not necessarily your capacity to acquire knowledge, otherwise you just hire academics.
Yes.
They acquire all the knowledge, but they don't know how to apply that. So I think this is it's not as simple as saying maybe we should have a specialist in it. I think there are times when it's really beneficial to bring in somebody from an e-commerce background, or a pure analytics, pure data background, or something like that. But other times you have to look at it and say, actually, what do I want? What I'm interested in, the big difference, it's a bit like when we're talking about internal mobility. The big difference is I'm looking at you not for your history of what you've done. Historically, that's why I've always looked at a CV and gone, right, Sam worked at these jobs for these companies doing these things. Therefore, we give him a slightly bigger title and a bit more responsibility. We can reasonably, and pay him a bit more money, we can reasonably predict that he will be able to come in and do this job. Historically, that's how we built our whole hiring system, right? And even more siloed when you're in the tech sphere, where you've gone, you've got 2 years of that language. You did that for AXA insurance, therefore you can probably do it for town and country insurance or whatever it is. The companies look similar, I can move you across. It's different now. And it's broader, much broader than TA, because you see more people moving cross-sector, which they never used to do. People generally stayed in their lane. And you were rewarded for staying in your lane, because every time you changed your job, you got another 5 or 10 grand for the knowledge, experience that you'd acquired. Now what I'm doing is I'm looking at you and thinking, I wonder what Sam would be able to do in 5 years' time. Is Sam going to be able to learn the skills and things that he's going to need to learn, and is he going to be able to apply them? Can I see in your history that you
picked up something different, done something different?
Continually evolve. Yeah, you've got that knowledge, and you haven't essentially got that knowledge in a traditional corporate way of you went to a course where you got a certificate.
Yeah, and I think it's like if we draw it back to tech more specifically, right, it then becomes this, I suppose it's a cultural shift within the organisation of, well, they know this back-end language, and it's got similarities to this, and actually they picked it up in this role, they ran it proficiently for 2 years. Well, if we gave them 6 months of training on the frameworks to the language which we're using, well, do they have all of those other skills, those other interpersonal skills, etc.? We know, houses that we work with that are go houses, right? And they'll take anybody with any back end language experience, and they'll kind of train people up, because they know the talent shortage is there. But that is it's a cultural shift within an org, and it's almost this whole piece. And we'd love to get your take on kind of skills-based hiring as well. It's like this, for both of those elements to work, it's that internal mechanism that needs to be related and work, and the pay structures and everything else that comes with it, because otherwise you are just in a situation where at the front end we know that we're looking at somebody, we're thinking, well, actually, in this world where knowledge is even easier to acquire than ever before, and it's not just retrieval of the knowledge, it's generating an output, is actually the problem solving ability to learn,
it's also to apply, right? It's also different, because the more you're in a specialist function, and tech is a great example of that. the more you had to acquire siloed skills. You had to go, and at the end of acquiring that knowledge, you were given a certificate that says, yes, Sam can do this. He can do this language. He can do that, right? And that whether that's you getting a degree, you going on a boot camp, always at the end of it was a piece of paper that said, Sam knows these things, therefore...
Or your repository with all of your code on it and your peer-related scores, right?
Here's your repository. Yeah, and tech is quite pure like that, in that there's always...
Something tangible.
Source, I can go and see what you can do. I don't have to rely on the certificate to say you can do that. I can examine your code. But the difference is, instead of needing to learn in one silo, we're now saying if you're going to have this portfolio career that might take you off in different directions, if we talk about degree learning, academic learning, you actually need a piece of 10 degrees and not one. You need a bit of business. You need a bit of, just to have a general business understanding of how your organisation works. You need a bit of data. You need a bit of programming. Increasingly, I think that's what we're looking at is, do you have this thirst and hunger to go out and acquire stuff? And can you show me that when you've started learning, networking is absolutely key for the knowledge of people who can help you, right? You know, you start a new job or a new role going out and speaking on behalf of a hacker job as opposed to selling a hacker job. That sounds like a small shift. It's actually pretty significant in terms of what you're doing. And then you'll immediately go, who in my network can I reach out to who are going to give me a bit of a steer in your message? Me and other people say, you do. It's like, how do I get to these events or do this stuff or do whatever I have to do? And I think that's what we're looking at. Can you connect with the right people and acquire that knowledge? And can you then apply that knowledge? And can you show me that you can apply that knowledge into something useful, right? So I think that affects our function.
And it's almost, it's like we talk portfolio careers. It's then having a portfolio network where you're connected to people from different industries, different parts of the business. It also then relates to like your almost portfolio lifestyle, right? We've moved to a different vein as humans as well, where, perhaps we've got more hobbies, more things which are closer to us, more interests. We're able to pick up podcasts. We're able to pick up different knowledge from different places.
Yeah, but
I think right? it's almost you're relating your personal, like the way in which we engage with things personally, where we're being served things that maybe we wouldn't have been able to see before in one way. And it's almost that expectation for variety in your working pattern as well. You want to be able to explore different things and work in different ways. And you're right, it is then the application, right?
It's how you apply that. So if I give you an example from my case, my scores as a speaker, which generally how I do, speaker in at conferences, went up by 3 marks when I went and learned stand-up comedy. Now, when I went to learn stand-up comedy, it's because I wanted to go to pubs in the East End and I thought this would be a fun thing to do. I thought it was going to be reasonably easy. It was actually really hard, but I learned lots of things about connections with audiences, dealing with disruptions, blah, 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 by doing 70 or so stand-up comedy nights, right, in pubs in the East End. Now, when I set out to do that, my intention wasn't I'm going to make myself a better professional. My intention was I want to go to pubs and have fun. This seems like a way I can have a laugh. And it's not recruiting, therefore it's a nice distraction for me. I need a distraction. And I went and did that. When I started doing street art, I suddenly had the opportunity in street art. I could do it. But when I became an artist, my work became much more creative in other things I was doing. So I think it's that you continually evolve as a person that comes back into your working life without you consciously doing it. You're not... I didn't consciously ever do that. Say, let's go and... I never went to do stand-up because I was going to be a better speaker.
And it's almost the other way, right? When I think about like really competent sales professionals, yes, you need domain expertise. Yes, you need to know, a sales process, and you need to follow playbooks, and you need to follow frameworks, etc. Like, if you're going to do things at scale, that is important. But what it all really boils down to as well is how can you build a connection with another human being? And that could be through any walk of your life. Like if you're going to have a successful long-term partnership, you need to be able to connect with somebody on not just, the commercials, not just the business, not just the kind of, I suppose, the logical part. It's also that emotive connection as well. And that can come from anything. That can come from having a different flavour of hummus or something the night before, whatever it is. You find something where two humans can connect as well, which I think goes back to the spice.
Yeah, but it's the classic example, right? So I go to a lot of events, you go to a lot of events, and and you notice the behaviour of people, right? And the behaviour of people. So I see, particularly if you've got salespeople, people in a sales role, and they'll go to an event and they're what I'd call the badge readers. So they'll go around the room and they'll look at a badge and decide when they look at your badge whether they're going to have a conversation with you or not. And generally, you know, I'm not a buyer of recruiting services, therefore those people don't speak to me. But I could probably teach them more about recruiting in a 5-minute conversation than they're going to learn from anyone in the room. And again, I think it's the approach you have if you're in a sales role when you go into that room and saying, actually, I should use this as an opportunity to spend a whole day learning what's going on in my market, what's the trends, what are people excited about, what are they not excited about. And if you're busy looking for who the next sale might be, who the next prospect might be, you're going to miss all that conversation.
And then you're unable to apply that in your next conversation, right? You have a conversation who's come and found you and they want to engage with you as a brand, and you're able to then, you know, relay that information, relay something that's interesting to people as opposed to, following. And I think it does draw back to that example of taking something, you know, comedy, stand-up, art, whatever it is you're doing in your life, you've got to be able to relate it back. And it comes all the way back to that example you said about recruiters. Well, generally, we're speaking to lots of different people from lots of different parts of the business. Maybe we're more resilient in an industry that doesn't have certifications, that doesn't have qualifications, formal ones, or hasn't really. Maybe we're more resilient. I think the bit which I want to finish on, it was a great talk when we were in Nashville. And you were looking at kind of some of the things which just remain the same, some of the things which are just a constant, right? So we're going through all of these paths of change, and we can speak about that a lot. And, you know, that's kind of the job of commentators and people discussing for a lot of the time. But what's constant? What remains the same? What are the things for people listening when you think about recruitment?
42 years on as an old man. 42 years on in the career. So basically, good hiring, whether a machine's doing it, humans doing it, or anything else, comes down to the same two cornerstones. The same two cornerstones are a good understanding of the job requirement and a good understanding of the candidate. And asking those two sets of people overlapping information, and when it crosses over, when the answers on both sides become the same answer effectively, when they overlap, that's good hiring. So it's properly understanding what are you working on. So I think that, and the other bit which I think is harder, it's very, very hard in hiring, especially when you're dealing with data and numbers, and you might go and work for a company where those data becomes 2,000 hires a year or 3,000 hires a year if you're in an enterprise. If you're Toby, for example, and I'm not saying Toby does this, by the way, so hacked it, Toby, I'm not knocking you, but it's very easy to forget that every single one of those data points is a human being, is a person, right, that has an impact. And that actually, when we do something every day, like arranging meetings, interviews, sending people in, we very easily forget the impact that the outcome has, positively and negatively. So forget about brand, forget about all this kind of stuff. Remember, the single biggest decision people are going to make that impacts their life more than anything else is the work they're going to do at that period of time. Because that affects their mood, their temperament, their well-being, their health, all these kind of things that we've discovered. And making the right choices and the right fit will impact positively and negatively on all those other things, their health and their well-being. And the success of any business ultimately is going to be determined by the people who come in the organisation. And I think we lose, because we're so busy doing, and when we talk about that 10% of magic, to me, that I was talking about right at the beginning of the show, we lose sight of the fact. I remember getting somebody hired in something like a contact centre years ago, you know, in my agency life. It was one of 500 people who were getting hired for a contract assignment. You don't think anything of it. You go through your process, you ask your questions. Yeah. Yes, no, it's pretty much personality fit. And when I came out of the meeting, the dad was there and they were all in tears and they were like hugging me and saying thanks for like, and then they tell you the story behind that moment, which was, you know, without my daughter getting a job, the dad saying like, I'm disabled and I can't work at the moment, I'm not fit for work. And if she wouldn't have got this job, we would be evicted from our home and then we'd be home. And when you think about it in that scale, we're just doing our job. We go in, asking people some questions, match it up. And I think what stays the same is actually the importance of the work that we do. Now, even if a machine goes and does most of that work with AI, never lose the importance of the impact of what we're doing, the difference we can make. And I think we need to not lose that over just how we feel about the work. As TA leaders, how do we feel actually about the work that we do? Forget about the awards, forget about the numbers, forget about all that stuff. This is why
it is the human effect, and I think it's a wonderful area to kind of finish on. I think the first two parts of just really simply like forget all the automation, forget all the technology, forget all of the process. You can put every single tool and person and specialist in place. If you haven't got those two parts right of understanding the candidate and understanding the role, then it's a lot of wasted motion, it's a lot of wasted energy, and that's there. And then that human part as well, it's so important. This isn't the cognitive decision. You're not being remarketed to buy a pair of jeans or to buy a drink or whatever it is. This is somebody's life. This is a daily impact that you're having.
It's exactly every single interaction, right? There's only 3 metrics you need to worry about in recruiting. This is the other lesson that I've built everything on every kind of scale. Activity, efficiency, result. What's the volume? What's the outcome of that? How good was it? And what's the final outcome? And we have to remember that every single one of those, when we're collecting that data and taking those numbers, making those, whether it's a phone call, whether it's an outreach message, if you're looking at Hacker Job and you're looking at going, well, how many messages are we sending out? Every single one of those is a human interaction that brings with it hopes and expectations and disappointment and all those things. And if we don't lose sight of that, we're always going to be successful. And that's always going to be the magic 10%. It's the humanity.
Wonderful bombshell to finish on. And I would implore anybody that sees Bill's name on a roster of anything online or any stage to go and watch him talk, and always grab a beer with him afterwards.
Just reach out, just send me a message.
It's been a pleasure, and I'll see you soon.
Thank you, Sam.